Hi, this is Steve, and I want to welcome you back to the Tech Leader Talk discussion. Would you like to learn how to validate your business startup idea or validate your business expansion plans? That's the topic we're talking about today. On this episode, I'm talking with Parth Trivedi, who's the CEO of Skylo Technologies, which provides a non-terrestrial network that connects devices around the world. In his role as CEO, Parth is responsible for leading business operations, including long-term goals, growth, profitability, and overall vision. During our discussion, Parth is going to share information about how his team validated their startup idea when they were creating Skylo Technologies. And this included seeking critical feedback from both independent advisors and potential customers. And Parth also talks about how he and his team approach innovation in an ever-changing market, and they focus on developing new systems that are changing their industry. Parth shares information about the challenges of designing new products that must operate within existing constraints, which is what they had to do, such as existing hardware systems and user behavior that you have to adapt to. So I'm sure you're going to enjoy this discussion, and you'll pick up some valuable tips that you can use in your own business. So here's the interview with Parth. Hey, Parth, thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Hi, Steve. It's an honor to be here.
Hey. So I told the guests a little bit about you in the intro, and that you're working with Skylo Technologies. Everybody always wants to know the journey or the backstory, how you got there. So tell us a little bit how you kind of your journey into the tech world, and then more particularly kind of into this aspect of space technology.
Sure, Steve. I was trained originally as an aerospace engineer. And when I came to Stanford to do my MBA at the business school, I really couldn't stay away from the engineering side of things. And I ventured out into the aerospace department and started collaborating with the head of the Space Systems Development Lab, Professor Andrew Coleman, who's credited with pioneering the CubeSat platform.
Oh, cool.
So he's a true inventor and pioneer in the space industry. And kind of that's how the original founding team came together. It was Andrew Coleman, one of his PhD affiliates, Andrew Nuttall, who's now my other co-founder and our CTO. We came together and we said, hey, why is it so we're launching satellites out of Stanford, we're launching CubeSats out of Stanford, and all of that's extremely exciting. But we started asking ourselves, why is it so cumbersome? Why is it so expensive to communicate with all of these birds that we're launching? And why is it that we have to use these, mesh antennas to communicate with these satellites? And what would it take, perhaps, for mainstream cellular communications and satellite communications to merge, so that people could just be connected everywhere they went? So we started thinking about that, and we really started collaborating together. I'm really grateful to Andrew Coleman for taking the leap, leaving Stanford to co-found the company with us back in December 2017. And we spun it out with some funding from Eric Schmidt's venture arm, Innovation Endeavors, along with a few other folks. And here we are.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about what it is you do. What are your products? And obviously they're in satellites and communications. What is it that's kind of unique about your systems and that makes you special?
So we are a non-terrestrial network service provider. That's just a fancy way of saying we connect cellular devices over existing satellites so that subscribers who are using those devices never lose coverage. And our mission is to provide coverage to people and machines at work in places where it has never existed before. And I'm factually speaking, in the next 18 to 24 months, I think largely speaking, this kind of connectivity is going to become mainstream as the fifth mode of communications in your smartphone. I mean, think about that for a second. Your smartphone currently has four modes of connectivity. It has cellular, it has Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and NFC, which is Apple or Google Pay, tap to pay.
Mhm.
The fifth mode of communication on your phone is now satellite. That's incredibly exciting because it's a fundamentally new capability in telecommunications, which has never really happened. It's been the holy grail of the satellite industry to be able to connect billions of devices. But the challenge has been, how do you do that efficiently using the scarce spectrum that currently exists? And how do you do that without launching incredibly complex and expensive satellites?
Yeah.
And how do you actually close the link to tiny devices that are inside people's pockets? Those are the three things that we've innovated on. And if you think about it, there's three legs of the stool here. There's chipsets encased within cellular devices. There's satellites, and we don't have any role to play in either of those other than being an enabler. We partnered with the largest chipset companies on the planet, such as Qualcomm, MediaTek, Sony, and others. And we have enabled their existing silicon to be compatible with our network. And
Okay.
on the other side, we formed partnerships with satellite operators who already have spectrum, who already have satellites. And we built the entire network infrastructure underlying this communication capability, including what's called the radio access network, the base station, for lack of a better word, the core, the entire traffic management system. So the entire intelligence that controls and orchestrates this network was designed and built by Skylo.
Okay. So are a lot of your systems then ground-based or terrestrial here on Earth?
Correct. So
Okay.
we have our base stations installed inside the Earth stations of the incumbent satellite operators that we
Okay.
partner with.
All right. Interesting. Yeah, seeing these, like I said, Apple's announced it, and so have other people, and have had add-ons to your phone to be able to do communication up to satellite, where you have nothing, where you have no cellular network or anything. And I was on the verge of getting a satellite phone because I do some driving in some really remote areas, and where there's virtually no traffic and there's no cell signal for at least an hour. So can't call AAA. And now that I see, well, if I can do this straight from my cell phone, even if it's just messaging initially, that would be good enough to, if I break down, let somebody know where I'm at. So it's interesting. So you'd mentioned that its satellites are one application, but you also talked about you integrate with machines and other types of devices uh, throughout the world. So what kind of applications do you have, or are applications are really is this most useful for?
Yeah. So to be honest with you, when we started the company, we weren't we weren't betting that consumer devices would move as quickly because the supply chain is quite complex, and uh, device makers aren't known to be service providers. So for
Mhm.
them to take the leap of faith in offering a connectivity service through their devices was just an assumption that was a bit of a stretch at the time. Um, and we focused on IoT to begin with,
Okay.
and we said, okay, how do we allow machines at work, whether it's Caterpillar equipment, whether it's trains, whether it's boats, maritime situations where you need connectivity. Um, how do we fundamentally allow sensors and people at work, machines at work, to mobilize data from these incredibly important environments? Um, Agriculture, maritime, energy and utilities,
Yeah.
construction, mining, all of these industrial sectors where data needs to be moved, but which is challenged by the lack of cellular. How do we start focusing on those first? And our initial partnerships on the device side, on the chipset side, really focused on those opportunities. And then, frankly, the standards, what's called the 3GPP mobile standards, which we members of my team contributed to with our chipset partners, started evolving quite rapidly, and was ratified in March of last year, where everyone kind of agreed on a common language for how do you connect cellular chips over satellite. And that sparked the race, as it were, for consumer devices to start having this feature. And of course, the Apple capability on the iPhone certainly helped, um, since it was another validation that an incredibly popular and probably the most popular phone in the market has this capability.
Right. And set the new standard. So every other manufacturer
Absolutely.
has to match it. So what uh, obviously what you're developing is new systems and new uh, creative software and things like that.
Hmm.
What's your approach to innovation, especially if you're doing something that's pretty different and you can't just it's not just a small iteration. Some of these I assume are kind of some big changes. How do you and your team approach innovation and overcoming some of those big challenges?
Actually, the need for innovation comes from constraints, comes from
Hmm.
the boundary conditions that you are faced with when
Okay.
you are developing any kind of commercial system like this. And for us, those initial conditions and boundary conditions were that, hey, you've got to make this possible without any changes to user behavior, where you can't go to a phone maker or a device maker and say, here's this highly specialized antenna that you've got to use with your phone. That just won't work. You can't go to a chipset company and say, hey, you've got to spin a new type of chip to make it work for us. Otherwise, it'll be limited in scale. So for us, a strong amount of emphasis in terms of the IP that we created early on went into how do you make these existing chips and existing devices work seamlessly with a non-terrestrial or a satellite network without any changes.
Mhm.
Then we also think about the very pragmatic, practical things that you encounter in daily life. As an example, uh, you want to be able to text the way you do, holding your phone in front of your face. You don't want to be texting with, the phone in your hand, reached out into the sky, trying to find signal, doing
Yeah.
some crazy yoga pose. Uh, that's not the kind of experience people are used to when they're sending a WhatsApp or a text message.
Right.
So again, that's another boundary condition where we say, okay, what does it take for us to improve the signal strength uh, between the satellite and the phone, and how can we make those improvements again with the other boundary condition of hey, no changes to the hardware. So
Hmm.
that resulted in what we call Skylo Standards Plus IP. So there were a fundamental set of things that we did. We contributed to the standard also that allows the connection to happen. But then, how do you take it to the next step in improving the user experience, improving capacity on the network to make this economically feasible for hundreds of millions of people to use at scale? Those are pieces of IP that our team innovated on, which we call Skylo Standards Plus, which are methodologies which are now being integrated inside chips, inside devices.
Okay. That's interesting. So with the growth, if we're going to have millions, hundreds of millions of phones that are going to now have this capability, is the satellite infrastructure there? Or, I mean, I know there's a lot of satellites being launched. Is that going to have to expand to support this a new type of service?
Actually, the current set of mobile satellite uh, systems, MSS systems, uh, are quite robust. They're more robust than people think in terms of how much power they radiate. What we did is we conducted a study for how do we get the best performance possible? Who do we need to partner with in each geography to provide the best in class service? What are
Hmm.
those incumbent assets that we can bring into use for this kind of capability? And so we aligned and made those right kind of partnerships possible. Uh, and the type of satellites we have right now are in geostationary orbit. Although all our tech is compatible with LEO also, we're agnostic to the space architecture, frankly. Everything is software defined. We're compatible with both LEO and GEO, but just so happens that the more potent satellites in terms of link budget are currently in GEO.
Okay.
They have a huge reflector. Some of them have up to a 22-meter reflector array. So
Wow.
imagine, huge, like tennis court sized, parking lot sized reflector in space. So you've got a big ear. but you've also got a big mouth because these satellites are capable of transmitting several kilowatts of power, which allows them to aid the process of closing the link with super tiny devices on the ground.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. What it seems like, so I'm just thinking back to 2017, 6 years ago. Had anybody else solved this need? I mean, you weren't into the cell phone type thinking yet. So you're looking at, you mentioned like construction equipment and maritime things. Were there other people there? Or how did you kind of come up with this idea when you were founding the company initially?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were and still are satellite solutions that are geared towards that kind of enterprise market,
Okay.
but they almost always require, in fact, always require a separate modem and a separate antenna relative to a cellular solution. So
Okay.
when we looked at that market and we thought about the total cost of ownership, we realized that the decision for a company is, hey, do I invest 300, 500,000 dollars in extra hardware for satellite communications? And do I pay 30, 40, 50, $100 a month for access to an IoT data channel over satellite? And there are very few use cases, very few applications that can justify that ROI when you have that high of a TCO.
Yeah.
But by leveraging the 2.5 billion chips that are produced each year for the cellular industry, we were able to rapidly bring down the TCO where your cost of ownership was frankly the same as cellular. You didn't have to buy separate hardware. You didn't have to invest in a new kind of hardware installation. Your BOM was your bill of materials. Therefore, on the hardware side, was comparable if not identical to cellular. And these cellular modems for IoT, Steve, compared to satellite modems, which cost hundreds of dollars, a typical cellular IoT modem is $3.50 average,
Mm-hmm.
which means the demand elasticity at these lower price points really opens up the market to new possibilities that just wasn't accessible before.
Right. Interesting. So I know you had some background and worked on other aerospace projects at MIT and the Department of Defense, NASA, and the FAA. How did that background or kind of that foundation help you as you were thinking about and launching Skylo?
Steve, I think I'm very fortunate, number one, to have had that kind of exposure before. And I think what that did largely was prepare me for operating in complex engineering environments,
Okay.
complex technical environments, and also complex business environments. It also gave me an appreciation for how the space industry works. I frankly did not have exposure to the telecom industry, so that was all new learning for me.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I'm incredibly grateful to have co-founders who have tremendous experience in the cellular side and the telecom side. So that's why we work so well as a team.
Okay. So since you've been through the startup process and the company's doing well, if a listener today is either thinking of starting a new tech venture or they're kind of in the middle of it, and we're kind of in a strange economy, different market right now. Some of the funding's not as available as it was a couple of years ago. What advice would you give? What would be the one or two tips for somebody who's either thinking about or just in the beginning phases of launching a tech startup in today?
Frankly, Steve, I think although the environment is different, the fundamental things that you should do to validate your startup idea still remain the same, right?
Okay.
You've got to test for product market fit early and often. You have got to almost get out of your own head because the amount of confirmation bias that a startup founder has early on in the journey is super high. And it's natural. everyone wants their idea to succeed. So you're looking for evidence that confirms that your initial beliefs were true.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would encourage folks to play more red team, blue team type things, associate themselves with independent advisors or independent board members who can give them critical feedback, but also get out there, talk to customers, talk to people who would actually buy your solution, get out of the technology and get into the problem. The more you spend time really um, gratifying yourself with the coolness of the technology, I think you're really missing out on whether that thing that you have built has merit, has willingness to pay out in the market.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's it's a valuable answer, and I've had several guests kind of mention the same thing, and that just emphasizes how important it is that you have people that, well, I've seen a lot of examples where they go off and spend all the time developing something, and that they think it's a great idea here, but the market doesn't really want it, or they want something very, very different, and then it's back to start over. So what kind of things did you do? Did you go out and talk to people in the marketplace specifically and do kind of just some potential client interview type things and say, hey, here's what we're thinking of. Would this be of value?
Absolutely. In fact, even before we had any kind of product, any kind of funding, we prototyped literally a 3D printed asset tracker, and it was literally a block of aluminum that I used to carry around and show to potential customers. Be like, hey, if this capability exists, that this is what it does. This is the price point, etc. Tell me how your business changes. Tell me what are the current ways that you're working that would fundamentally change if you could access data in these environments. And so we thought about how much value we could potentially create if we worked with these customers. And of course, those early testimonies helped shape our product roadmap. The other thing we did was we reached out to experts in the field, almost in a prove us wrong type mode, where we invited companies. In fact, Boeing, which I have a lot of respect for as an engineering company, we invited them to conduct diligence on us back in 2017, and they ended up becoming one of our first investors, which I'm again very grateful for, their Horizon X fund. But again, by reaching out and asking people, challenging yourself through others, helps you only improve that initial idea that you had.
Okay. Yep. I like that. I like the one question that you mentioned, not just would you be interested in this or whatever. If this was available in your business, how would it improve your business? How would it make your life better? Things like that. That's an amazing question. Because then their answer is going into your marketing, because chances are everybody else wants the same feature. Now I know you're not necessarily building the systems going into space, but how do you test some of your systems when you've got to interact with the existing satellites, and you said you meet all these different constraints? Is that a fairly simple testing and simulation process, or is it more complicated than I'm thinking?
Our team makes it look simple, but it's not. Obviously, we have to be good custodians of spectrum. We have to be good custodians of the satellite assets that we work with. These are incredibly expensive assets, and we want to be good partners to the companies we work with. So we have a sandbox environment that we have built in our lab at Skylo, which we give ourselves, our engineers, but also our customers access to. Because if you're a device maker or a chipset maker building our capability into your chip or inside your device, you need to have this rapid iteration environment where you're testing, failing, learning, growing, and evolving. And you obviously don't want to do that over the air, because you're potentially going to disrupt satellite operations. So what we did is we created a sandbox environment. We have simulators that simulate not just atmospheric conditions, but also the entire end-to-end latency with different kinds of satellite systems. We can introduce all types of interference. We can introduce various kinds of latencies and Doppler and other kinds of cool things and understand what that does to the link.
Okay.
Once we are sufficiently satisfied, we graduate customers to an over-the-air environment, but it's a pre-production environment. It's secluded and away from our commercial traffic, so it's dedicated channels that are only meant for testing and certification purposes. So again, we have a second layer of protection there, where the testing that we're doing is air gapped, quite literally, with our commercial traffic.
Okay. Interesting. So is that to be sure that maybe a new customer, a new client comes in and their data is different or they do something different and you just want to test it off on its own channel before you potentially mess up the bigger traffic?
Yeah, I'll give you an example, right? So one of the benefits of the cellular standard that we exploit is retries, where the device will try to send a message again if it fails the first time. And that's a good feature, but you obviously don't want a device that's constantly pinging the network and eating up all your radio resources.
Yeah.
So we ask and enforce certain requirements in our certification guidelines, which are implemented by the chipset makers and the device makers that use those chipsets. And we have to certify that indeed the customer's device met our test criteria for that particular test case.
Yeah.
And so some of these test cases are easier, and frankly, they're more rapidly testable in a lab environment. So we partnered very recently with a company called Keysight, which makes the most popular test equipment in the market for cellular devices. And they have introduced all our test cases inside their standard equipment. So if you want to run our certification program, you can actually do it on existing Keysight devices, which Keysight test equipment. So we're really excited about that partnership, which will help phone makers, device makers roll out the solution even faster.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's good. What are some of the biggest challenges that you and the team are facing?
I think execution is always where it all comes down to. Rubber hits the road, and it is the first time that a service like this is being launched in the market. We are creating a new category for communication, so we're obviously incredibly excited. At the same time, we're humbled by being the first company to do this kind of thing. So what that means is we have to operate very meticulously. We have to ensure that the user experience we get right the first time, and we have to make sure that all our systems that we're building are scalable. So going from 0 to 1 and 1 to 100 in a telecommunications environment, including what aspects you might consider mundane, like billing, OSS, BSS systems, we have to be incredibly meticulous about. So these are some of the things that we pay a lot of attention to as an executive team, and that we have to absolutely get right. No chances for error here.
Okay. As with many things in the space industry, that's a common theme.
Absolutely, and we're a relatively nimble, small team, so we're doing quite a lot. We're punching far above our weight at the moment. That's
good. So, what's the most exciting part of your job? What do you love the most?
There's two things actually. One is the internal aspect and the external aspect, and the common thing between them is continuous learning and growth.
Mm-hmm.
The internal piece is working with people who are frankly way smarter than I am in every aspect of the job that they're doing. So my colleagues, whether it's Andrew or Tarun, my co-founders, other members of my team is just an incredible learning experience for me internally working with them. Um, and I really enjoy that part of my job where I get to whiteboard with them. I get to run strategy sessions with them and execute. Um, and on the external side, it's learning about new industries. So because we're in the telecom domain, we touch everything from automotive to smartphones to
Yeah.
wearables, and pace of change is rapid in each of these industries. But having a bird's eye view, because we're a data service provider now across these industries, has been again a very gratifying experience as CEO.
Okay. It does. It sounds fun, and I'm sure no 2 days are the same, right, in your world. What's ahead for you and your team in the coming year?
So we've recently enabled our customers, Bullet Motorola, with devices that they have launched into the market. So we're certainly uh, uh, working quite hard to make our customers successful this year. We are working on other opportunities, some of which have been publicly announced, some haven't. One partnership that was recently announced was with Qualcomm, where they are an important customer of ours. Our service is being introduced inside their most popular IoT platforms and under the Qualcomm Aware platform. So we're super excited about that. We'll be spending a lot of time making that partnership successful on the ground going into next year. And what you'll find is that there will be devices launching in every category, from enterprise IoT to consumer wearables to consumer smartphones that feature our service.
Okay. Sounds like a busy year.
It is.
Um, one last question I like to ask every guest, because I do a lot of reading and I always love to find new things from my reading list. What's a favorite book that you've read or listened to? Fiction, nonfiction, whatever
Yeah,
pops to mind.
yeah. I recently read Chip War by Chris Miller. I don't know if you read that one,
No.
but it it gave me a very interesting lens on the semiconductor industry and also the geopolitics of technology, which is often overlooked, but plays an incredibly crucial role in shaping how technologies come to market and why they do. So it was a fascinating read, really enjoyed it. And I just started reading. I'm literally on the first chapter of The Next 100 Years, George Friedman.
Hmm. Okay. I will put both of those in the show notes so people can find them if they're interested. I think I've heard of the first book, Chip Wars, but I haven't read it. But having lived in Silicon Valley for quite a few years and following lots of companies, that would be interesting to see more of the history than what I have picked up so far. So our time's about up, but I want to just say thank you for taking the time. I know you're busy and love hearing about your experiences, and I know the audience is going to benefit from that. If anybody has questions or they want to learn more about you or more about Skylo, what's the best way to reach out?
Always happy to get reached out to on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find under Parth Trivedi.
Okay.
And more than happy to connect with any of your listeners if they have any questions or follow-ups that I can connect with them for.
Okay. I'll do that.
And
And I'll
thank you
put
so much,
your,
Steve. Thank you so much, Steve, for having me on your podcast. It was a
okay.
real pleasure talking to you.
Well, it was my pleasure. And I will have links to your LinkedIn profile as well as the website in the show notes. So if anyone wants to get a clickable access to that. So thanks again. I will let you get on with the rest of your day. And it was a pleasure talking with you.
Likewise. Thank you, Steve. Cheers.